These games aren't the stories that we tell. They're the way in which players are going to build their characters, figure out how combat works, figure out how magic is going to happen, whether their character lives and dies. It's the way in which conflict is going to be resolved. Certainly some lend themselves more one way or the other, but you could take your Star Wars story and tell it in Dungeons & Dragons. You'd have to do a lot of effort to get there. You could make clerics, Jedi, and sorcerers Sith. Rogues become smugglers and rangers bounty hunters. Why not pick up the Star Wars RPG and save yourself a lot of time and effort? There are a lot of choices in RPGs for you to play. When I was learning to play, GURPS was the thing. You can go play that. Still exists. It was harder to find niche audiences for these different games. These days with Kickstarter, social media, website reviews, YouTube, this kind of stuff, it's a lot easier to build an audience, to get some hype around a new system, get people interested to play. That's also very expensive. It starts with $20 for the player's handbook, even for the PDFs for many of these things, not to mention a Dungeon Master's Guide and probably a bestiary and maybe a campaign setting. So you're talking about the low end, $60, maybe $100 or more. I've seen some that go for $200 for the giant box set. And what happens if your players don't like that system? You're going around and picking up a whole new system, hoping that it will fill your players' needs, that they're going to enjoy this one rather than that one. It's also a lot of rules to keep in our heads. Even playing mostly Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder and a little bit of Call of Cthulhu, I often refer to the wrong thing for the wrong system. I've got rules from orcs from 4 different editions and Pathfinder in my head, and I'll end up using the wrong one. A common one for me is to call out for a diplomacy check or sense motive check. My players are going,
"It's like he's trying to speak to me, I know it!"
They never played those games or those editions, so they have no idea what I'm talking about. There's also a lot of reasons to play a new system. New things are exciting. People like to try out new things. Things get old and things get stale. Maybe Dungeons & Dragons you stopped playing years ago because this edition has been out for a while. This could reinvigorate you into the hobby. Maybe you're moving to college or you finished up college, you're moving away to wherever you're going to work, and you've got a bunch of new friends, and you find out some of them would like to play some sort of a role-playing game. And they're interested in trying, but they don't know how to do any of this stuff. Yeah, we'd like to try, but we don't have a dungeon master. We don't know what that person's supposed to do. We don't know how to do that. Would you be our dungeon master and help us learn how to do this? Maybe you get a campaign that lasts for a year or more. Maybe you play for a month. Maybe it's just a one-shot. It's a reason to spend some time with some friends, and it's a way to make some friends. And that's worthwhile in and of itself. A new system could remove something that's been really irritating you about your current system that you constantly have to fight with because it's a pain for the way you and your friends play. Or it could introduce something that you never knew was missing, something that you always wished your current system had. Common complaint about 5th edition is that the way that it describes the exploration pillar doesn't provide enough guidance for the current dungeon masters. A new system could give you something to steal and put into your current system, whatever that is. I'm James, and I talk about all the things I think about as I plan and plot for my Dungeons & Dragons game. And if you're listening this far, then clearly you like that content. There's some buttons down there for you for like and subscribe. You push both of those, I appreciate it. Theme, of course, enters into it. If you want a sci-fi game, pick a sci-fi system. If you want a cosmic horror game, pick a cosmic horror system. You could muscle Dungeons & Dragons into either of those, but why bother? Save yourself some effort. Even within all of these different genres, there's a lot of different systems to choose from. So which one? All RPGs are fundamentally trying to answer the same 3 questions. How do we determine success? What do we care to determine success for? And how granular should that success be? If you're doing true improv, theater kind of stuff, whose line is it anyway, and you are just telling a story, and you say, I slay the orc or I climb the wall, the orc is dead, and you are now at the top of the wall. Anyone taking on the story after you has to proceed with the assumption that there is now a dead orc on the floor and you are at the top of the wall. RPG systems don't start with the assumption of success. There's always a possibility of failure. Sure, yeah, if you told me that you tried to climb a ladder, I'd hand wave and say, put the dice down. You don't have to make a roll for that. It's fine. But if you're the Dread Pirate Roberts trying to climb the cliffs of insanity without a rope, I'm absolutely going to ask you for a climb check because there's a possibility of failure there.
Look, I don't mean to be rude, but this is not as easy as it looks, so I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't distract me.
At the baseline of the RPG pyramid, that's where you get the base, how do you determine success? It's where we get D20 systems. You roll a D20 to determine success, obviously. That's also the least that a system cares to model success or failure. Do you save or suck? Are you charmed or are you not charmed? Did you climb the wall or not? One level up from that is where you start getting into caring about different levels of success, where we care about the 20 and the 1 way more than we care about the numbers in between, the other 18 numbers. Or things like, how much damage are you going to do? You cast Fireball, but how much damage did the Fireball do? And did that person just make their save, or did they fail their save? Having been doing this for a while, reading different systems, playing different systems, and coming up with my own homebrew stuff, I've already come up with answers for myself of how I handle the fuzzier, softer bits of RPGs. Things like the exploration system, making magic items, harvesting monster bits, and big grand spells that don't fit into the player's handbook scope. Things like, all these planets must be aligned, and you must gather spell components from the 7 corners of the world. What I look for is the combat system and the magic system, the everyday player magic system, because that's where disagreements are going to happen. They happen at the table, things are going to ground to a halt. The players or I don't understand how those two systems work, and we come into disagreements. They're going to feel betrayed by the system. This didn't work the way I expected it to. That doesn't make any sense. Surely it should be this way and not that way. Or they're going to feel like the dungeon master pulled a fast one. Well, if I had known that that was going to work that way, I would not have done this. So can we just go back 1, 2, 3 rounds to where I made that decision? Because I wouldn't have done that. Whenever I am perusing, browsing, and looking at an RPG system that I might want to buy to replace my current system or as something that I can harvest bits from for my current system, I'm looking at 2 classes, roles, skills, whatever you want to call these things. The first is your fighter or warrior or your basic martial, whoever is making with the stabby stab.
The pointy end goes into the other man.
This is going to take a lot of work.
And the wizard or magician or whatever you call your most complicated magic user. The fighter, because every other martial is going to be doing some of what this person does, so it gives me an idea of how complicated combat is. How many levers are there to combat, both in terms of complexity and slowness, pace of combat, and in terms of rewards that I can give this character. There's also the magic user in terms of rewards that I can pull from all their spells to add to other magic items for other characters, but also because that's the most complicated magic is ever going to get. They have all the things like dispels and counterspells and buffs and different things that they can do to characters to improve the way they operate in combat and CC spells that are going to affect how I build encounters. So I want to look at these 2 things to see whether it's a good fit for my table. Is this too crunchy? And my table is going to feel like, yeah, it's super detailed and that's cool, but it's dragging everything into a halt as we try to navigate all these different side qualifications to combat. Or is it not complicated enough where they don't feel a sense of progression? They don't feel like one character is that much different than another character. Warrior A is the same as Warrior B, except that the name is different, and one says dwarf and one says human. So, and there's no rewards. Using the 5th edition fighter, since pretty much everybody knows how this person works, if I was new and looking at the system for the first time, I'd say there's a fair amount for the fighter to do. Not as much as other systems, but more than others. There's lots of things that they do in a given turn to figure out how their combat's going to work, and those are all potential rewards for me to give. Also the same things that it's going to slow combat down. There's the attack roll. Did I manage to hit a hypothetical orc? Damage roll. Did I kill hypothetical orc? The number of attacks. How many attempts do I have to kill hypothetical orc? And movement speed and initiative, different combat bonuses, things like the flanking rule, things like that all stack up. and they are all potential rewards, potential decision points for the fighter, also the things that are going to drag combat to a halt. Every decision point is one more thing they have to do. Think of like the action surge. Do I use it this round? Do I not? And if you do use it, that's another attack roll and another damage roll. Maybe if they hit the orc. If they get up to, say, 5th level, that's where I'd say low level stops, then that's only 2 attacks and 3 if they've got an action surge. It's not a big deal. A 5-minute turn turns into a 7 or 8-minute turn. If you're playing high level, all of a sudden a 10-minute turn turns into a 15 or 20-minute turn, and it's 20 minutes before the next person gets to go, which means it's now, an hour or something between a table of 4 to 5 players? Okay, that could be a lot. Is that worth you giving up at your table? A lot of players like these tactical decisions. They like having a lot to do. They have a lot to discuss. They like showing off what their character can do. It makes them feel special at the table. That may or may not be worth giving up. Do you remove a lot of those levers? Those are all your magic items and all your rewards. Things like boots of haste, magic swords that give bonuses to attack, or flame tongue weapons that both give bonuses to attack and bonuses to damage. You take those things away, it might make them feel less special and less rewarded for their time at the table. A lot of current systems are trying to play with the attack roll. MCDM and DC-20 are both playing with this in different ways, partially for different reasons. MCDM is trying to remove a null result. They don't want to have nothing happen on a turn. If I miss, that feels bad. If I miss and something happens, that still feels like the story moves ahead. At least that's the theory. DC-20, on the other hand, is saying, what if we combine the attack roll and the damage roll into just the D20? So you roll the D20, and the amount that you exceed the armor class, that's going to determine how much damage you do. That might speed up combat, but you have now combined damage and attack rolls into one. So how do you figure that out? You could still potentially do a flame tongue weapon in that scenario. You could say that, yes, it does this, but on top of whatever damage that you did in looking up this chart, which is going to slow it down again, you could roll this 2d6, and that's going to add additional flame damage on top of whatever your damage thresholds are. Is that good for your table or not? I don't know. They're your players. Daggerheart is splitting up the attack roll into 2 different dice. So instead of 1d20, you're rolling, I believe it's 2d12. One is a hope dice, one is a fear dice. They will impact your attack in different ways. If you're rolling to attack something, you're still rolling a damage roll. That person is going to have to figure out how that affects it. As far as I can tell, there aren't multiple attacks, so you are winning and losing in terms of the speed at which the game is played. They are focusing on a more narrative story, so maybe that's okay as long as you're slowing it down to tell more story. And in this particular case, as I'm reading through just the warrior, I'm going, I don't know necessarily which one of my fights are going to be deadly and change a story into something grander than it was. I don't know where my villains are. I don't know where they came from until it happens. So even just from that, I'm going, there might be some things that I definitely steal from this, kind of like the hope fear dice mechanic, but it's not going to fit with my more open world explore and we'll figure out the story as we go along kind of style. With Magic, I'm looking at the bulk of spells. How many are there in the game? When a wizard player encounters another wizard or goes into town, they may try to bargain for new spell scrolls so they can learn those. When they level up, they get new spells, and that can slow things down. I'm also looking at how do they handle magic in a mechanical sense? How does a wizard figure out what they have to go with the next day? I like a lot of these options. I like Vancian magic. It is weird. It is strange that you read from a book all these spells and they become lodged in your brain, then you speak them out in the world and you've completely forgotten them, and the next day you have to go memorize them again. I get that. That is weird. But it is magic. Should be weird. If it wasn't weird, it would be science, not magic. A lot of players, and I'm including Dungeon Masters, do not like that kind of a system. They prefer something that is more mana points or powers driven. MCDM and Daggerheart both seem to be going into the power direction. And that does make more sense to people, but it does feel less arcane. It feels a little bit less like playing Gandalf and more like playing a superhero character. Players might like that if it speeds up combat, if it makes it easier for them to manage their wizard, and if it matches their own internal ideas of what they think a wizard should be. Is that good for your table or not? Again, what are your players like? Do they really like the detail? Let's grab a tome and let's look through all these spells, all these choices that I have to make. Or do they reach a certain amount of decision paralysis where they're going, no, I don't want to play a wizard, and you never end up with one at your table. They gravitate to sorcerers or warlocks instead because it's just easier for them to manage something that's more akin to mana points or powers from a video game. A lot of what we do as Dungeon Masters is a negotiation between who we are as Dungeon Masters, what kind of game we like, what the game mechanically will provide, and what our players like. There's a lot of people online that are super into one particular system as if it's going to solve every problem that RPGs ever had. And it might for their table. A lot of people that are super interested in Daggerheart are going, yes, because Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games are a narrative thing, and this is a narrative game. It's going to solve all our narrative problems. It may very well be the perfect system for them. A lot of players are super into the gritty, nitty combat thing, and they want all the crunch. More crunch, please. And Pathfinder 2e is a really great system for them. Some other players want something that is kind of middle of the road, but much more tactically, MCDM, good choice. Some other players are truly just in the middle, in which case a DC 20, Dungeons and Dragons, Tales of the Valiant, those all might be good choices. And if you're players interested in one of these other games, then please talk to your dungeon master and say, this is what I'm interested in.
And let me tell you why.
Instead of just saying, hey, please go spend some money and time learning this system that I may be done with a week after I started playing it. If you're a dungeon master, it may be worth your time figuring out who your players are in the spectrum of players. That's why I talk about who my players are and trying to figure out who they are, because we do end up often tailoring our game to our players' expectation. And that may mean a whole new different system, or maybe just port the Ranger over from Tales of the Valiant into 5th edition. This is one player really wants to play a Ranger, but the new D&D edition Ranger, it's not great. And it works for everybody else. So if we just port this over, we're good to go. Until next time, Dungeon Masters, remember you're a player too. Try to have some fun.